we look at the Sphinx today that's hiding, this is what the ancient Egyptian in the late period thought the same. Then they came and they began to dig to find out what's hidden under the Sphinx.
For nearly 4 decades, one name towered above all others in the world of Egyptology. That name was Zahi Hawass. To millions of people around the globe, he was not simply an archaeologist with a doctorate and a government title. He was the living, breathing guardian of ancient Egypt itself. His distinctive wide-brimmed hat became as recognizable as the pyramids he worked beside, and his voice, confident, forceful, and absolute, shaped what the entire world believed about the greatest monuments ever built by human hands. Born in 1947 in the Nile Delta region of Egypt, Hawass studied archaeology at Alexandria University before earning advanced degrees in Egyptology from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. His rise through Egypt's archaeological bureaucracy was steady and determined. By the 1980s, he had positioned himself at the very center of activity on the Giza Plateau, the vast desert complex outside Cairo that contains the 3 Great Pyramids and the monument that would become the center of his most controversial work, the Great Sphinx. By the early 2000s, Hawass had ascended to the position of Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, and later served as the country's Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs. In practical terms, this meant that almost nothing of significance could happen at Egypt's greatest archaeological sites without his knowledge and approval. His influence was enormous, and he wielded it without hesitation. Television producers seeking access to film at Giza came to Hawass. Foreign universities hoping to excavate Egyptian soil sought his blessing. Journalists wanting authoritative statements about ancient history called his office. He appeared in countless documentaries, always speaking with the kind of certainty that discouraged further questions. And on one subject above all others, his position was firm, clear, and repeated so many times that it became as fixed in the public mind as any historical fact. There was nothing hidden beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. No secret chambers. No underground halls. No buried mysteries. The Sphinx was a monument tied to the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, built around 2500 BC as part of a royal funerary complex, and its story was fully understood. Case closed. For decades, that answer satisfied most people. After all, who would know better than the man in charge of every shovel, every scanner, and every archaeological permit on the plateau? But what the public did not fully realize was that behind the scenes, away from the television lights and the press conferences, a far more complicated story was quietly unfolding. And at the center of that story were questions that Hawass himself had spent years investigating, questions that his official public statements never fully addressed. The chain of events that would eventually shake the foundations of official Egyptology did not begin with a dramatic discovery or a sensational announcement. It began with a practical engineering problem in the 1970s. The Great Sphinx is an incredibly ancient structure, carved directly from the natural limestone bedrock of the Giza Plateau. After thousands of years exposed to desert wind, temperature changes, and the slow creep of groundwater rising from below, structural engineers had become genuinely concerned. Parts of the massive stone body showed signs of deterioration. Cracks were spreading. Layers of limestone were flaking away. Something had to be done. To assess the monument's internal condition without physically cutting into it, engineers employed a technique borrowed from the world of medical imaging. By sending acoustic waves, essentially controlled pulses of sound energy, into the stone and carefully measuring how those waves bounced back, researchers could build a picture of what lay inside the rock below the surface. The principle was similar to the ultrasound scans that doctors used to look inside the human body. The team set up their instruments and expected a straightforward result, solid limestone bedrock from top to bottom, just as the geology of the region would predict. What the machines returned instead was something the engineers had not anticipated. Instead of a uniform, uninterrupted signal indicating solid rock throughout, the data showed anomalies. Interruptions. Areas where the acoustic waves behaved differently, suggesting that the rock in those zones was not solid. These signals were consistent with the presence of open spaces, hollow areas, existing somewhere beneath the monument's floor. The engineers noted the findings. They were interesting, but not immediately alarming. The Giza Plateau, after all, is riddled with ancient shafts, buried tombs, and forgotten tunnels. Archaeologists had been uncovering such features for well over a century. The simplest explanation seemed obvious enough. The hollow areas were probably undiscovered burial chambers of the type commonly found across the plateau. But the mystery did not rest there. In the years that followed, research teams returned to the Sphinx with increasingly sophisticated instruments. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, ground-penetrating radar had become available, a far more powerful tool capable of producing detailed, high-resolution maps of structures buried beneath the surface. In 1991, a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted by a team that included geophysicist Thomas DeBecke suggested the presence of large cavities beneath the Sphinx's pores and body. And this time, the data revealed something that could not be explained away as a natural formation or a simple forgotten tomb. The cavities were not scattered in the random, irregular patterns that natural geological voids typically produce. They were arranged with a degree of symmetry that immediately struck the researchers as unusual. Recent technology, including ground-penetrating radar and advanced tomography, has revealed geometric voids and symmetrical cavities beneath the monument, especially under its northern pore, suggesting the presence of chambers carved into the bedrock whose shapes are too regular to be natural formations. A cavity detected on the north side of the Sphinx appeared to have an almost identical counterpart on the south side. The two spaces mirrored each other with a precision that natural cave systems almost never produce. Even the most carefully constructed ancient Egyptian tombs, which were designed by skilled architects, were not typically built with this kind of perfectly balanced, abstract geometric arrangement hidden beneath another monument. The question had changed. Researchers were no longer simply looking at unexplained empty spaces under an old statue. They were looking at what appeared to be a deliberately designed arrangement of underground features, something that showed the hallmarks of intentional construction. It was during this same period, in the late 1980s, that Zahi Hawass personally supervised a series of drilling operations at the Sphinx as part of a major restoration project. The official purpose of the work was entirely reasonable on the surface. The ancient limestone was deteriorating, and engineers needed to understand the structure of the rock layers beneath the monument in order to plan effective repairs. To accomplish this, specialized core drilling equipment was brought in. Long, narrow bits were driven into the stone, extracting thin cylindrical samples of rock from deep below the surface. The technique, known as core drilling, is a standard and well-established method in geological and engineering science. What made these operations quietly remarkable, however, was the specific placement of the drilling points. Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner undertook excavations beneath the main body of the Sphinx at Giza and rediscovered access tunnels to several large, apparently natural, caves directly under the Sphinx. But beyond the tunnels themselves, the chosen drilling locations were not spread evenly across the monument. They were targeted. And when those locations are compared against the maps produced by the radar surveys, the pattern becomes striking. The drill sites corresponded closely to the very areas where the anomalous underground spaces had been detected. Zahi Hawass publicly announced that there was nothing at all below the Sphinx, neither any tunnel nor a single chamber, and yet there are photographs of him entering descending shafts from the head of the Sphinx and another at the far rear of the monument. When pressed about the tunnels and chambers that researchers had documented or photographed him entering, Hawass reportedly dismissed further inquiries by saying that it was not possible to explore deeper, as the passages were either blocked or filled with water. The official report that followed the drilling operations was brief and, on its face, unremarkable. The core samples, according to the published findings, showed only normal layers of limestone, the same natural rock found throughout the Giza region. No hidden chambers were confirmed. No artificial structures were identified. The report was clear, and it aligned perfectly with the public position Hawass had been maintaining for years. But the drilling had accomplished something that no other research effort before it had managed to achieve. Hawass now possessed physical samples of rock taken from deep within the monument, extracted from locations directly adjacent to the mysterious underground anomalies. While other scientists could study radar images and seismic data, he held actual pieces of the ancient limestone pulled from the very boundary of the unknown. And those small cylinders of stone, as later analysis would begin to suggest, may have been carrying information that nobody had yet known how to read. While the debate over what lay beneath the Sphinx continued in the world of archaeology, a separate and equally significant controversy was developing in the world of geology. And it centered on a question that had been sitting in plain sight for anyone willing to look at the surface of the monument itself. The body of the Great Sphinx and the walls of the deep enclosure in which it sits show patterns of erosion. That much has never been disputed. What has been fiercely debated is what caused those patterns and what they tell us about the monument's age. On the body of the Sphinx and on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the pit or hollow remaining after the Sphinx's body was carved from the bedrock, there are heavy erosional features that could only have been caused by rainfall and water runoff. The man who made this argument most forcefully was not a fringe conspiracy theorist. He was Robert Milton Schock, an American associate professor of natural sciences at the College of General Studies at Boston University, a Yale-trained geologist with serious academic credentials. Schock points to deep fissures and rounded contours in the Sphinx enclosure as evidence of heavy rainfall, describing the undulating profiles and vertical cracks as showing precipitation, not desert winds. Schock's argument rested on a fundamental observation from basic geology. Rocks eroded by wind-blown sand have a ragged, sharp appearance, while rocks eroded by water have smoother, undulating erosion patterns resulting in wide fissures. The erosion on the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure walls fit the second pattern, not the first. The grooves ran vertically, from the tops of the limestone surfaces downward, exactly as one would expect from rainfall flowing down exposed rock faces over extended periods of time. Wind erosion moves horizontally, following the direction of the prevailing winds. Water erosion moves vertically, following gravity. The marks on the Sphinx moved vertically. This created an enormous problem for the standard historical timeline. The Sphinx sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert, and the region has been quite arid for the last 5,000 years. Various structures securely dated to the Old Kingdom show only erosion caused by wind and sand, which is very distinct from water erosion. If the Sphinx shows water erosion, and the region has been dry for 5,000 years, then the monument must predate that dryness. In 1991, Schock redated the monument to between 10,000 and 5,000 BC, based on water erosion marks he identified on the Sphinx enclosure walls and also based on findings from seismic studies around the base of the Sphinx. Ironically, Schock had not set out to rewrite history. He had traveled to Egypt with independent researcher John Anthony West, expecting to debunk his claims. Within moments of examining the erosion patterns himself, he realized he had been wrong in his skepticism. The geological evidence was, in his professional judgment, unambiguous. During the early Holocene period, around 10,000 to 5,000 BCE, the Sahara was a much wetter region, with lakes and vegetation. If the Sphinx was carved during that wet period, it would mean the monument is not approximately 4,500 years old, as the standard history maintains. It could be anywhere from 7,000 to 12,000 years old, predating the pharaohs, predating the unified Egyptian state, and predating virtually every civilization that historians have traditionally recognized as advanced enough to carve such a monument. The mainstream archaeological community, including Hawass, rejected Schock's hypothesis firmly. The techniques used, such as ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity, can indeed detect subsurface anomalies, but anomalies are not evidence, and without direct excavation and verification, they remain ambiguous signals that can just as easily reflect natural geological formations as man-made structures. Egyptologists argued that Schock was misinterpreting the erosion, that other factors could explain the patterns, and that the broader archaeological context, the nearby temples, causeways, and pyramid complex, firmly placed the Sphinx in the 4th dynasty, around 2500 BC. But Schock's argument did not disappear. It has persisted in academic and scientific circles for more than 30 years, and it continues to be discussed and debated by researchers across multiple disciplines. As the geological debate continued, a series of technical surveys were quietly producing data that kept the underground mystery alive. From 1973 onward, a series of serious pioneering projects were launched, using ground-penetrating radar and other high-tech remote sensing equipment to locate anomalies under the bedrock beneath the Sphinx, channeled through well-established academic institutions. Among the most significant of these efforts was the work carried out by a team from Waseda University in Japan. Japanese researchers brought a disciplined scientific methodology to the problem, conducting systematic surveys across the Sphinx enclosure and compiling their data carefully. The conclusion of the Japanese work suggests that the sanctuary of the Sphinx contains more cavities below the Sphinx than were previously known. The combined data collected by the research resulted in indications of hollows located under the Sphinx not yet identified, cavities running from north to south underneath the Sphinx, and a tunnel south of the Pyramid of Khufu. The north-to-south orientation of the cavities was particularly striking. This was not the random scattering of voids one would expect from natural geological processes like water seeping through rock over millennia and slowly dissolving limestone. Natural cavities form irregularly, following the path of least resistance through fractures in the rock. A series of connected voids running along a defined directional axis suggested something different entirely. It suggested design. Early scans showed clear underground voids directly beneath the monument. The shapes appeared rectangular and symmetrical, unlike the irregular patterns of natural fissures. NASA satellite images later revealed additional subsurface anomalies around the Giza Plateau. Despite these findings, Egyptian authorities allowed no excavation, with officials arguing that the cavities were natural fissures and that drilling risked damaging the monument. The refusal to allow excavation became itself a point of significant controversy. It is not reasonable that anyone should have so much objection to any kind of probe or even a simple aerial photograph being taken, which might lead to the discovery of yet another amazing wonder of the world, and a wonder that would draw many more thousands of tourists to Egypt. Critics of the official position argued that the concern for structural integrity was legitimate but could not explain why even non-invasive investigative methods were being restricted or ignored. They pointed out that if the cavities turned out to be nothing more than natural voids in the limestone, a simple investigation would confirm that conclusion and end the debate permanently. The persistent refusal to investigate, they argued, raised more questions than it answered. Hawass, for his part, maintained his public position. He denied all rumors about a hidden city under the Sphinx, assuring that such news was not based on scientific evidence, stating, "We have a lot of photos that document the process of digging under the Sphinx, proving that there are no passages under the Sphinx and that it is a concrete statue." He acknowledged the existence of 3 known tunnels, one discovered in 1937, one on the north side, and one behind the Dream Stele, but dismissed any suggestion that these connected to a larger underground system of significance. Alongside the scientific debate, a separate and more ancient current of belief has always flowed around the Sphinx. For centuries, travelers, scholars, mystics, and ordinary people have sensed that this colossal stone figure was more than a simple monument to a dead king. The legends surrounding it are remarkably consistent across cultures and centuries, and they share one persistent theme, that the Sphinx conceals knowledge. The most widely known modern version of this idea was popularized by the American psychic Edgar Cayce, who in the early 20th century described a buried repository of records beneath the Sphinx that he called the Hall of Records. According to Cayce's visions, this chamber contained the preserved history and accumulated wisdom of a civilization far older than ancient Egypt, a civilization so advanced that its existence would force a complete rewriting of human prehistory. Cayce's followers were deeply invested in the radar surveys of the 1990s, hoping that the detected anomalies would prove his predictions correct. But the idea of hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx did not originate with Cayce. Political considerations, heritage management, and concerns about sensational claims have led to a cautious approach, leaving many of the most intriguing anomalies beneath the Sphinx uninvestigated, awaiting future technologies that might allow exploration without physical intrusion. Medieval Arab scholars who wrote about the monument centuries before modern archaeology existed described it in terms that suggested a functional significance beyond mere decoration. The Egyptian writer Al-Makrizi referred to the Sphinx as a powerful talisman. Other ancient commentators described the space beneath the monument in language that implied purpose, phrases suggesting the structure was not merely decorative but operational in some sense. These descriptions do not prove anything. Ancient texts are notoriously difficult to interpret, and languages separated by thousands of years of cultural change do not translate cleanly. But the persistence of the idea, that the Sphinx was part of something larger, something purposeful, something that had been deliberately hidden, is at minimum a striking feature of the monument's history across vastly different cultures and time periods. What makes this particularly interesting, in light of the radar data, is the way the underground anomalies seem to connect outward. The most recent scans have not simply confirmed the presence of chambers directly beneath the Sphinx. They have suggested that whatever lies below the monument does not stop there. Pathway-like structures appear in the data, extending beneath the desert sands in directions that lead toward the other great monuments on the plateau. The question is no longer just about what is under the Sphinx. It is about what the Sphinx might be connected to. The debate entered a new phase in 2025, when an Italian researcher named Filippo Bondi brought the latest generation of scanning technology to Giza. Bondi's team combined ground-penetrating radar with muon tomography, a particle tracking method that measures cosmic rays passing through rock. Muon technology had famously exposed hidden spaces inside the Great Pyramid in 2017. By pairing these two methods, Bondi aimed to create a three-dimensional map of the bedrock beneath the Sphinx. The results were striking. Early scans showed clear underground voids directly beneath the monument. The shapes appeared rectangular and symmetrical, unlike the irregular patterns of natural fissures. To validate his equipment and methodology, Bondi had first tested his instruments on the Osiris Shaft, a known underground complex at Giza that has been documented since 1933. The radar mapped the shaft's interior with remarkable precision, matching every chamber and corridor that explorers had documented decades ago, demonstrating that the same technology can reveal accurate details far below the surface. Armed with this validation, Bondi's team then turned to the Sphinx. And the data they retrieved was consistent with what earlier surveys had suggested: underground anomalies that appeared to be structured rather than natural, located precisely where decades of scanning had repeatedly shown them to be. During a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, Rogan confronted renowned Egyptologist Zahi Hawass with Bondi's results, arguing that if the Khafra project could map the Osiris shaft so accurately, then the scans showing voids under the Sphinx should also be taken seriously. Hawass's response to this challenge was notably different in tone from his earlier categorical denials. Rather than flatly dismissing the evidence as fantasy or the work of people who disrespected Egyptian heritage, he appeared to acknowledge a degree of uncertainty. His position seemed to have shifted, however slightly, from absolute denial towards something more qualified, an acknowledgement that something may indeed exist beneath the monument, paired with a claim that Egypt was not yet ready for what might be found. That shift in language, subtle as it was, did not go unnoticed. For those who had followed the story for decades, it represented a significant departure from the iron certainty that had characterized Hawass's public statements for so many years. Hawass, once the loudest skeptic, now acknowledges that something is indeed hidden beneath the Sphinx, but insists that Egypt is not yet ready for what might be found, suggesting that the implications of discovering pre-dynastic artifacts or evidence of a civilization older than the pharaohs could unravel the story Egypt has told the world for generations and provoke debates reaching far beyond archaeology into religion, politics, and humanity's understanding of itself. At its core, the mystery of what lies beneath the Great Sphinx is not simply a puzzle about one ancient monument on one plateau in one country. It reaches far deeper than that. If the underground anomalies detected by decades of scanning represent artificial chambers, spaces carved by deliberate human hands, then the question of who carved them and when becomes one of the most consequential questions in the history of human civilization. The accepted timeline of human prehistory rests on certain assumptions. We assume that organized, large-scale construction requiring architectural planning and coordinated labor emerged at a particular point in history, in particular places, following a particular developmental sequence. The standard account of the Sphinx fits neatly within that framework. 4th dynasty pharaoh, 2500 BC, royal funerary complex, well-understood historical context. Every other piece of the established narrative depends, to varying degrees, on that kind of chronological certainty. But if the Sphinx is significantly older than that, if the water erosion evidence that geologist Robert Schoch has spent more than 30 years defending is correct, then something was happening in the Nile Valley at a time when, according to conventional history, there should have been no civilization capable of producing it. And if an elaborate underground system exists beneath the monument, connected by tunnels extending across the plateau toward the pyramids, then whatever built the Sphinx also built something far more complex than a simple statue. Something with structure. Something with plan. Something whose purpose we may not yet understand. Today, non-invasive technologies offer new hope for solving the mystery. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and muon imaging can peer beneath stone without disturbing it, and already such methods have revealed voids and hidden structures in other ancient monuments. The technology to answer the question now exists. What has been lacking is the political will and institutional openness to deploy it fully and to accept, without predetermined conclusions, whatever the evidence reveals. The forbidden dig remains a matter of national pride and concern, with the Egyptian government strictly forbidding excavation beneath the Sphinx, citing concerns for the monument's structural integrity and the potential for catastrophic collapse. These concerns are real and should be taken seriously. The Sphinx is a fragile and irreplaceable artifact of human history, and damaging it in pursuit of what lies beneath it would be an irreversible loss. But non-invasive scanning technology has advanced to the point where the choice need not be between investigation and preservation. It is now possible, in principle, to map what lies beneath the monument with extraordinary precision without disturbing a single stone. The question that remains is not really a scientific one. The tools exist. The technology is ready. The question is whether the world, and the institutions that control access to the Giza Plateau, is prepared to ask it honestly, to deploy those tools without restriction, and to accept the answer that comes back, whatever that answer turns out to be. The Great Sphinx of Giza has been watching the eastern horizon for somewhere between 4,500 and 12,000 years, depending on whom you ask. It has outlasted the pharaohs who may have built it, the empires that restored it, and the desert that repeatedly buried it. It watched while Rome rose and fell. It watched while the medieval world came and went. It watched while the modern age of science and archaeology slowly turned its instruments in its direction. What Zahi Hawass found beneath the Sphinx, or rather, what the combined weight of decades of scanning surveys, core samples, geological analysis, and reluctant admission suggests may be found there, is a question that the monument itself has been asking all along. Not in words. Not in inscriptions. but in the geometry of its underground anomalies, in the vertical scars of ancient rainfall carved into its limestone flanks, in the tunnels that descend below its body toward a water table that has been rising for centuries, and in the stubborn refusal of the mystery to go away no matter how many times official voices have declared it closed. The machine that Zahi Hawass found under the Sphinx may not be a machine in any mechanical sense of the word. It may be something far stranger and far more significant, a designed underground system whose function belongs to a chapter of human history that has not yet been written, a chapter that the sand of the Giza Plateau has been keeping secret for longer than most of us have been willing to imagine. The Sphinx has waited this long. It can wait a little longer. But the instruments are ready. The technology is available. And the world, slowly and with growing urgency, is beginning to ask the question that can no longer be deferred. What exactly is buried beneath the oldest and most enigmatic monument ever raised by human hands?